Today I'm in the little Provençal village of St. Croix, overlooking the Lac de St. A rather nice place. It was man-made in the early 70s. This used to be farmland. And today I'm going to have a go at painting this little subject, and I want to do it in quite a simple, sketchy way. Now for the sky I'm using phthalo blue and quinacridone magenta. These give a nice sort of, a nice sky colour when they're mixed together. The magenta tempers the harsh turquoise of the phthalo blue. And I just paint this in a very simple way. Add a little bit of white to it now. This is for the lake. Now the white gives a bit of body, and a little bit of the aureolin just gives me more of a lake colour. And I continue on down below the sky. When I get to the bottom of the lake, I'll stop there. Now this is still very wet, and I'm going to mix up a colour that's suitable for the building. So I'm looking for a nice warm brownish colour. And you can mix up anything in your paint box for this. And then just allowing it to mix with the wet edge of the sky and the lake. And actually it's not sky, it's the mountains in the background. And just changing the colour a little bit as I apply it, I continue on down basically to the bottom of the painting. I will get some green now, so I'm adding some aureolin and some ultramarine to that mix. And again, just letting that blend in with all those wet edges. So what I'm trying to produce is a first wash that is a continuous wash, top to bottom, very wet. Now after allowing that to dry completely, I'm mixing up some new colour for the distant hills behind the lake. Now it's important that the paint is applied simply, one stroke if at all possible. Once you have covered the paper with paint, there is no point touching it again. That simply causes muddiness. Once that section is completed, it's important to dry up the little drips. If there are no drips, you're not painting wet enough, so make sure there are drips and just dry them up with the tip of a brush. Now for the lake, again, I'm using white to give that milky look to the lake, and I'm just wanting a couple of quick streaks of the brush just to, hopefully I'll leave some of that previous wash so it'll give a little bit of sparkle in the water. Now with the lake completed, it's time to start on the buildings. Now I want the rooftops to remain very light because as you can see they're in the sun. So I'm mixing up a darker terracotta type of mix, and I'll apply that basically to everywhere other than the light roofs. Once again, it's important to dry up the drips. So I use my brush dipped in the water and then dried, and you have to keep cleaning it because obviously as you dry up the drips you're filling the brush up with colour. Some green now, obviously the green from the first wash is very, very pale, so I'm trying to get a random coating of green that suggests the beginnings of the vegetation. Don't be afraid to mix your colour on the paper because that will give you good variety. Don't mix it all completely in the palette. Now you've probably noticed me changing my brushes. Obviously I'm cutting certain things out of the video for just to save a little bit of time. This is a sword liner brush, and this is great for trees, those little spindly branches and spindly twigs. It works really, really well. Now that everything has dried, I'm able now to go into the second time on the buildings, and this time I'm going to use a little bit of a darker wash just to get that variety. So again, I like to use 3 washes. I like to have a light wash, visible, medium and dark. So this is medium or thereabouts because I still have the chance to get some even darker washes in later. As the painting continues, I'm basically adding stronger and stronger paint all the time. So this time I'm using this nice dark green, both to give me the dark green vegetation, but also to set off the lighter parts of the buildings on the left. I'm careful not to overpaint all of the lighter greens. It's very important that you leave some of that earlier light, because it is light, and in watercolour the only light you have at the end of the painting is the light that was there in the earlier stages of the painting, so it's very important not to lose that. When I'm painting vegetation, I'll very often use the side of my brush. Brushes aren't made to release paint from the side, and so as a result you tend to get quite an uneven, dragged look, and that suits vegetation perfectly. Cypress trees are very common in this part of the world, and they're very simply done just with a quick upward stroke with a well-filled brush, and it gives you the shape of the cypress tree pretty much automatically. Splatter is also good for vegetation because it gives you a very random distribution of paint, and that suits the suggestion of leaves very well. And again, the sword liner helps to give me those nice spindly branches. Now I'm bringing those well up, right up over the edge of the building, right over the lake, and even right over the background hills. This gives you an overlapping shape, and overlaps are always good to suggest depth. Again, a little bit more splatter for the leaves, and a few more strokes with the sword liner in order to give me those twigs. Once again, I allow the paint to dry before the next stage, and this time we're going to be going for the really strong darks, and the really strong darks are what give a sparkle to a painting. I have sketched in a couple of figures in the original drawing, but I haven't left room for them. I rarely leave room for figures. It means then I have the option at the end of either putting them in or not putting them in. In this case, I think they'll maybe add to it. And I'm really just again, simple. I want the figures to be part of the landscape. I don't want the figures to take the landscape over. So I try to keep it very simple. Just if I can get the proportions correct, then the figures will generally look like a figure. Shadows always help to link a figure to the ground. The figures are standing on the ground, they're connected to the ground, and therefore you expect to see no hard edge between the bottom of the figures and the ground. So a shadow is a good way of connecting things together. I hope you've enjoyed the video. Remember that if you go onto my website, you can find lots more things of interest to the watercolour painter. Thank you for joining me.